Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, June 22, 1941. The sun rose over Europe like any other summer morning, except this time, 3 million German soldiers were tiptoeing across the Soviet border with tanks, bombers, and a plan so bold it made Napoleon look like he was playing Risk. But why did Hitler, fresh off his victory tour through Western Europe, decide to gamble everything on a lightning war against the Soviet Union? How did the Germans manage to crush entire Soviet armies in weeks, only to find themselves knee-deep in Russian mud, frostbite, and regret? And what secret weapon did Stalin unleash from the icy depths of Siberia that turned the tide and shattered Hitler's dream of conquest? This is not just a story of war. It's a tale of arrogance, ideology, and the brutal reality of underestimating your enemy. From the Blitzkrieg's roaring start to the bone-chilling Soviet counterattack, we'll uncover the twists, blunders, and battles that made Operation Barbarossa one of the most dramatic military campaigns in history. So grab your trench coat, your map of Eastern Europe, and maybe a thermos of something hot, because this journey through the Eastern Front is about to get epic. It all began with a book. Not a cozy bedtime read, mind you, but Hitler's Mein Kampf, where he laid out his dream of Lebensraum, living space for the Aryan race. And where better to stretch out than the vast, potato-rich plains of the Soviet Union? By mid-1940, fresh off his 6-week European speed run through France and the Low Countries, Hitler was feeling invincible. Britain was still flapping about in the skies, and Stalin, his temporary frenemy thanks to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was busy rearranging Eastern Europe like a Soviet IKEA catalog. But Hitler wasn't buying the long game. He believed communism was a house of cards, and all he had to do was kick the door in for the whole thing to collapse. Spoiler alert, the door was made of reinforced Siberian steel. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German troops, thousands of tanks, and the Luftwaffe's finest took off like a military flash mob across a 1,800-mile front. 3 army groups had their marching orders. Army Group North, Leningrad, the city of Borscht and Ballet. Army Group Center, Moscow, the big prize. Army Group South, Kiev, gateway to Ukraine's breadbasket. The plan? Blitzkrieg. Fast, furious, and preferably over by lunch. The Germans expected to wrap things up in 6 to 8 weeks, like a hostile corporate takeover. They even packed light, because who needs winter gear when you're planning to win before the snow? At first, it worked like a charm. The Luftwaffe obliterated the Soviet Air Force on the ground. German tanks rolled through the frontier like they were on a sightseeing tour. Soviet troops, caught off guard and poorly led thanks to Stalin's paranoia-fueled purges, were encircled in massive battles. Hundreds of thousands were captured or killed. It was a military magician's dream. Troops disappearing in pockets, supply lines stretching like spaghetti, and Hitler grinning like a man who just bought Poland on eBay. But then, reality knocked. Turns out, the Soviet Union wasn't a pushover, it was a hydra. Cut off one head, and 2 more popped up wearing their shankas and wielding Mosin Nagants. By December 1941, the Germans had captured 3 million Soviet soldiers, yet the Red Army kept fighting. Supply lines were overstretched, fuel was freezing, and German boots were about as winter-proof as flip-flops. Just 20 miles from Moscow, the Soviets launched a counterattack. Like a bear waking from hibernation, they pounced. German troops, exhausted and frostbitten, were forced onto the defensive. Hitler's dream of a quick victory melted faster than a snowman in July. While the Germans were busy playing exterminator in the rear, the Soviets were frantically redrawing their front lines like a student cramming for finals. Reinforcements poured in. Trenches were dug. A brand new defensive line sprang up in front of Moscow, like a surprise pop quiz. And these weren't just any troops. Some wore civilian clothes. Some shared rifles like roommates sharing a Netflix password. But they were there, and they were digging in. Meanwhile, British supplies began trickling in via Arctic convoys to Murmansk and Archangel. It wasn't glamorous, think soggy boots and shared rifles, but it was just enough to keep the Soviets in the fight. Now here's where Stalin pulled off a logistical magic trick that would make Houdini blush. As the Germans advanced, Soviet factories packed up their machines, kissed their families goodbye, and moved to the Ural Mountains. Yes, entire industrial complexes were relocated like nomadic steel caravans. The result? Soviet war production didn't just survive, it thrived. The mighty T-34 tank, a mechanical beast with armor like a brick wall and mobility like a ballerina, began rolling off assembly lines and onto the battlefield. And then came General Mud. October in Russia is a cruel joke. Snow falls. Then it melts. Then it snows again. The roads turn into a muddy soup that swallows tanks whole and makes marching feel like swimming in molasses. The German advance slowed to a crawl. Supply lines snapped. Armored divisions were down to 50% strength. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, it did. By late November, the Soviet winter arrived like a vengeful ice queen. Temperatures plummeted. German soldiers, dressed for a summer picnic, were now freezing in foxholes. More troops were hospitalized with frostbite than with battle wounds. The offensive was over. Barbarossa had stalled. But wait. There's more. While the Germans were licking their frozen wounds, Stalin played his final card. He had learned that Japan wouldn't attack from the east, so he transferred entire divisions from Siberia to Moscow. These weren't green recruits. These were battle-hardened winter warriors, trained to fight in conditions that would make a polar bear shiver. On December 6th, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive. The Germans, caught off guard and half-frozen, were forced into retreat. The dream of capturing Moscow melted away like snow on a tank's exhaust pipe. And just like that, Operation Barbarossa was dead. Hitler's ideological fantasy, that the Soviet Union would collapse with a single kick, was shattered. The Blitzkrieg had morphed into a war of attrition, and Germany was woefully unprepared. They didn't have the manpower, the supplies, or the winter coats to match the Soviet resolve. But Hitler wasn't done. In 1942, he launched a new offensive, not toward Moscow, but toward the Caucasus oil fields and a city called Stalingrad. His generals begged to resume the push on Moscow, but Hitler had finally realized, too late, that this was a war of resources, not ideology. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Operation Barbarossa, with all its icy twists, muddy missteps, and Siberian surprises, don't forget to follow us, be generous, subscribe, and smash that notification bell so you never miss another tale of intrigue, strategy, and historical drama. We've got more epic stories